a world where mainstream pro wrestling can be a little too predictable and bourgeois for its own good, injecting a bit of irreverent silliness such as that with the 24/7 Championship is a nice palate cleanser for the business as usual that surrounds it. For fans who have clamoured endlessly for a return to the Attitude Era, the 24/7 belt is a hearty throwback to those less rigid times. Though the novelty of the classic WWE Hardcore title wore off once you were getting 14 title changes in a night, the championship certainly embodied the spirit of its time. The 24/7 belt's spiritual predecessor guaranteed a touch of jovial chaos on those celebrated Attitude Era cards, and more importantly, it could give some forgotten undercarders something to do. Here we will look back at 52 individuals that held the Hardcore title in its less than 4 years of existence, and for a little bonus, we'll determine what the most hardcore aspect of each champion was, because it's important to keep a record of these things. Mason Ryan, Stevie Ray, Earthquake, Alundra Blaze, Norman Smiley, Zach Gowen, Bam Bam Bigelow, Ahmed Johnson, Tory Wilson, Buff, Bagwell, Robert Gibson, Dave Taylor, Terry Taylor, and Godfather's Hose. Dwayne Gill, Adam Bomb, Michael Hayes, Cor Von, S.A. Rios, Jim Manai, the manager from Kai and Tai, Jim Powers, Francine, Jack Swagger, Mean Gene, Fat Chick Thriller, Duke the Dumpster, Oklahoma Manta. What happened to that wrestler? Some were main eventing, which leaves me lamenting. What happened to that wrestler? Some since long forgotten, but their memories live on. Viscera. Viscera is hardcore because he managed to deliver his 1995 King of the Ring coronation speech well enough, despite being showered in garbage by the Philly faithful. Sadly, Nelson Frazier passed away of a heart attack in February 2014, just days after his 43rd birthday. Chris Jericho. Jericho is hardcore because he deftly managed to turn his legitimate loss of the AEW Championship belt, as well as an aggressive yearning for champagne, into a catchy meme. Despite that recent steakhouse snafu, Jericho reigns as AEW's first ever World Heavyweight Champion, the biggest star in the upstart promotion. Trish Stratus. Stratus is hardcore because she interrupted Kane and Lita's freak show wedding just to remind Lita of the low standards she kept for herself. Largely retired for the better part of the last 13 years, Stratus wrestled what appears to be her true final match against Charlotte Flair at the 2019 SummerSlam. Christian is hardcore because he once destroyed John Cena in a battle rap, only for Cena to get the win via politics. You know, it's always politics. Retired since 2014, Christian collaborated with his true brother Edge in the world of podcasting and on WWE Network's Edge and Christian show that truly reeks of awesomeness. Headbanger Thrasher. Thrasher is hardcore because, as a jobber in 1993, he agreed to let the Smoking Guns hit him with a rather frightening back body drop turned pile driver. Still occasionally wrestling, usually alongside Mosh, Glenn Ruth is the general manager of the UFit health clubs in Lake Worth, Florida. Funaki. Funaki is hardcore because you don't become SmackDown's #1 announcer without being a legitimate badass alpha male. And Funaki is still a #1 announcer, providing Japanese commentary on WWE events alongside partner Shun Yamaguchi. Terry Runnels. Terry is hardcore because she continued to have an active presence in professional wrestling even after China ragdolled her in horrific fashion at WrestleMania 13. Long retired from wrestling, Terry has hosted the Cigars, Stars and Superstars podcast on MLW's radio network. Cynthia Lynch. Cynthia, or Godfather's nameless hoe, wow that sounds bad, is hardcore because she managed to win a sanctioned WWE belt without even being on the roster, something only Santino Marella, Rob Stone and Ennis Cantor can also claim. Formerly married to Al Snow, Cynthia Lynch now lives in Louisville, Kentucky, where she works as a hairstylist and burlesque performer. Rodney. Rodney is hardcore because he's the only gang member that ever successfully pulled off the sweater vest Narcissus Prince hair combination. Still bleeding posse blood today, Rodney Lionheart lives in New Jersey where he operates a landscaping business. The Hurricane. The Hurricane is hardcore because he brought the Vertebraker into prominence for American wrestling audiences and even managed to fold up AJ Styles with her on an episode of WWE Velocity. These days, Sugar Shane Helms helps out backstage at WWE as a producer, rejoining the company in 2019. Mighty Molly. Molly is hardcore because in 2009, she voluntarily took part in the Polar Bear Plunge, submerging herself in ice-cold waters in the dead of winter to raise money for the Minnesota Special Olympics. The former Molly Holly trains wrestlers at Minnesota's Academy School of Professional Wrestling and counsels troubled teens battling addiction at the Minnesota Teen Challenge. Joey Abs. Abs is hardcore because as a jobber in 1996, he got to pin Steve Austin in a handicap match after an assist from Davey Boy Smith. Yes, really, the new generation was a strange time, I'll tell you that much. Retired since 2001, Jason Arndt now lives in North Carolina, where he worked along with his father at their body shop. Kurt Angle. Angle is hardcore because he can regain resilience just by lowering the straps of his singlet. And if he pulls the straps up and then pulls them back down again, his opponent is probably seconds away from death. Retired as of WrestleMania 35 following a brilliant 20-year career, Angle works backstage for WWE as a producer. Matt Hardy. Hardy is hardcore because he invented an entire universe rooted in drone messengers, supernatural bodies of water, sea vessels of diminished quality, and Bride of Frankenstein hairstyles, all because he completely lost his goddamn mind. Hardy still wrestles for WWE, but primarily works house shows as of this video, while Brother Nero sits out due to injury. Shane McMahon. Shane is hardcore because he jumps off really high things in a bid to get his father's attention, but instead, Vince spends all of his time doting upon Shane's younger brother, XFL McMahon. Still out of his mind at 49, Shane was recently kayfabe fired on the premiere episode of SmackDown on Fox and is a minority owner of the company. Pat Patterson. Patterson is hardcore because he and Sergeant Slaughter had an honest-to-goodness 5-star bloodbath at Madison Square Garden in 1981, thus making him the most hardcore person on this list. Patterson still serves as consultant for WWE today at age 78, and recently became the oldest title holder in company history by winning the 24/7 title in July. Mike Awesome. Awesome is hardcore because he was still rocking the mullet at the turn of the new millennium, and anyone that made fun of it usually got launched for distance through a table. Sadly, Michael Alfonso took his own life in February 2007, a month after his 42nd birthday. Kane. Kane is hardcore because he can set people on fire at will. Seriously, what else is there to say? I mean, he did once lock his father inside a freezer, but that's just more cruel than anything else. The current mayor of Knox County, Tennessee, has appeared on WWE much less frequently, but did manage to win the 24/7 title in September 2019. Mankind. Mick Foley is hardcore because... oh, for Christ's sakes, it's Mick Foley! Hardcore is the guy's middle name. If we have to explain why Mick is hardcore, we'd probably also have to explain to you why septic tanks smell bad. Foley, the original hardcore champion who also introduced the 24/7 belt, still appears occasionally on WWE programs amid his various speaking and comedy appearances. The Undertaker. The Undertaker is hardcore because he still wrestled in an Elimination Chamber match mere minutes after he was nearly burned alive in a very real pyrotechnic accident. Turns out he's just as unkillable as his character. Still wrestling from time to time at 54, Undertaker turns up in his all-black garb and won a no-holds-barred tag team match alongside Roman Reigns at Extreme Rules in July. Road Dogg. Road Dogg is hardcore as demonstrated on the internet series Are You Serious?, where he and Josh Matthews subjected themselves to the very worst in professional wrestling. Wonder where they got the idea. Formerly a top writer for primary WWE programming, Road Dogg now teaches promo classes at WWE's Performance Center. Johnny Stamboli. Stamboli is hardcore because of the slingshot leg drop he did out of the ring onto a chair in WCW, which is the worst thing you can do to your ass unless your name is superhuman. Having not wrestled since 2014, Stamboli works as a mortgage loan officer in Phoenix, Arizona. Pete Gas. Gas is hardcore because he managed to win his second hardcore title at WrestleMania 2000, despite bleeding profusely after being waffled by a box fan. Pete Gasparino ended up writing a book on his experiences as an unlikely wrestler and works in sales for office supply company WB Mason. Perry Saturn. Saturn is hardcore and a hero for an actual incident in 2004 in which he saved a woman from being sexually assaulted by two men, sustaining 2 gunshot wounds in the process, which he initially ignored amid the scuffle. Today at 52, Saturn still makes occasional wrestling-related appearances, while unfortunately dealing with the effects of repeated brain injuries from his time as a wrestler. K-Quick. K-Quick, or R-Truth, is hardcore simply for finding new ways to remain entertaining and relevant in 2019, close to 2 decades after his oft-forgotten time in WWE's undercard the first go-around. Of course, R-Truth today is the patron saint of the 24/7 title scene, demonstrating his comedic resourcefulness all the while. Christopher Nowinski. Nowinski is hardcore for his tireless work in examining the long-term effects of repeated and/or undiagnosed head trauma, raising deeper awareness on the issue in wrestling, football, hockey, among other contact sports. Nowinski, himself a noted concussion victim, is the executive director of the Concussion Legacy Foundation, which he co-founded. Booker T. Booker is hardcore for reportedly taking down Batista in a one-on-one fight at a commercial shoot in 2006 after he felt the future Drax had disrespected much of the SmackDown roster. Booker still makes WWE kickoff shows interesting with his lively chatter and operates Reality of Wrestling in his native Houston. The British Bulldog. The Bulldog is hardcore because at SummerSlam 1992, in front of 80,000 of his countrymen, he defeated Bret Hart for the Intercontinental title, whether he wanted to or not. Sadly, Davey Boy Smith passed away of heart failure in May of 2002 at the age of 39. Billy Gunn. Billy is hardcore for maintaining a consistent level of professional success, even when making the difficult transition from the cowboy life to falling in love with his own arse. At age 55, Gunn, who is still in phenomenal shape despite hitting middle age, is a senior producer for All Elite Wrestling. Gerald Briscoe. Briscoe is hardcore because, according to Jim Cornette in an old Shoot interview, Kevin Nash demanded to know why he was the lowest paid WWE champion ever, and Briscoe flat out told him, because you were the lowest drawing WWE champion ever. Briscoe, who also held the 24/7 title for a spell this year, works today as a talent scout for the WWE. Test. Test is hardcore because he dared to try and make the dreadful Extreme Elimination Chamber match exciting by hitting a flying elbow smash off the top of one of the chamber pods onto a steel chair. Sadly, Andrew Martin passed away in March 2009 of an oxycodone overdose shortly before his 34th birthday. Taz. Taz is hardcore because he broke his neck on a stuffed piledriver during an ECW tag match in July 1995 and was back in the ring less than 2 months later. Taz is now the co-host of the CBS Sports radio series Taz and the Moose, along with Mark Malusis. Jeff Hardy. Jeff is hardcore because he will literally perform his swanton bomb off any structure, regardless of height, and may have actually been the stunt double of the fan that fell onto Reggie Jackson in the first Naked Gun movie. Jeff still wrestles for WWE at age 42, though is currently sidelined due to a leg injury. Big Show. Big Show is hardcore because Hulk Hogan attempted to kill him by throwing him off of Cobo Hall at Halloween Havoc 1995, and Show just reappeared later in the night with nary a scratch. After a long period of inactivity, 47-year-old Paul White recently received clearance for an in-ring return following 2 hip surgeries. Maven. Maven is hardcore because he continued to wrestle after The Undertaker beat him to death at the 2002 Royal Rumble, the most one-sided beating this side of most of Tyson's fights in the 80s. Last active as a wrestler in 2016, Maven has worked as a bouncer in New York City. Rhino. Rhino is hardcore because he's somehow managed to look almost the same for the last 20 years and is still as volcanically lethal as he was when he was breaking tables and necks in ECW 20 years ago. Rhino returned to Impact Wrestling in the summer of 2019 following several years with WWE. Rob Van Dam. RVD is hardcore because of the exercise he invented, the Van Dam lift, which the mere image of is enough to make all of us weep in superficial pain. Still mightily flexible at 48, Van Dam is back with Impact Wrestling, returning there in the spring of 2019. Big Boss Man. Boss Man is hardcore because Dusty Rhodes once broke an ungimmicked wooden chair over his head, which Boss Man just no-sold anyway. The chair was supposed to be gimmicked, but neither Boss Man nor his reinforced skull seemed to mind. Ray Traylor sadly passed away in September 2004 of a heart attack at the age of 41. William Regal. Regal is hardcore for a multitude of reasons, not the least of which was allowing his arch-nemesis Dean Ambrose to cave in his skull with a knee trembler in a disturbing torch-passing moment. Regal reigns today in WWE both on-screen as NXT's general manager and off as WWE's Director of Talent Development and Head of Global Recruiting. Hardcore Holly. Hardcore is hardcore because of his ability to work through serious pain, whether it was a broken arm against Kurt Angle or a ghastly laceration across his back against Rob Van Dam. Holly, while still wrestling the occasional match at 56, enjoys living the simple life in Dubuque, Iowa. Al Snow. Snow is hardcore because he had the only pro wrestling related toy ever removed from Walmart shelves due to customer complaints. Not even the action figures that literally sweated got that kind of heat. Snow currently owns Ohio Valley Wrestling, trains Tomorrow's Stars, and is still active as a wrestler at 56. Steve Blackman. Blackman is hardcore because he's Steve Blackman. Chuck Norris wears Steve Blackman pajamas. There is no chin under Steve's beard, just another foot he can kick you with. I want to go on a picnic with Steve Blackman. This is the last time we let Jack guest write an entry, I promise. Blackman has been a teacher of wrestling and jiu-jitsu in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and also became a bail bondsman. Just incredible. Credible is hardcore because he wrestled for over 2 years with a jockstrap on his face, and still managed to deftly transition into looking like Edward Norton in American History X. Credible returned to the ring in 2019 after a 1-year hiatus, wrestling primarily in the New York and New Jersey area. Spike Dudley. Spike is hardcore because he's been thrown into the crowd more times than all of John Cena's t-shirts combined, despite weighing about 140 pounds on his best day. After last wrestling in the 2010s, Spike has since worked as a financial transition specialist at Merrill Edge in Lincoln, Rhode Island. Goldust. Goldust is hardcore because of most of the things he did as Goldust, not the least of which was creating an iconic and celebrated character out of something that, in lesser hands, could have been destined for the WrestleCrap stall of shame. At 50 years of age, Dustin Rhodes assumes a backstage coaching and training role with All Elite Wrestling, where he occasionally wrestles, sometimes, against brother Cody. Bubba Ray Dudley. Bubba is hardcore for the many times in which he nearly facilitated riots at ECW shows, challenging fans to fights and insulting them to the point of near-violent rage. As Bully Ray, Bubba worked for Ring of Honor in a backstage capacity while still wrestling on occasion. Tommy Dreamer. Dreamer is hardcore because he took 'em both. Oh, and because he's the heart and soul of ECW, the ultimate in never say die battlers, but mostly because he took 'em both. Dreamer is a busy man in 2019, owning and operating House of Hardcore, competing and working in creative for Impact Wrestling, and working backstage for AEW. Sean Stasiak. Stasiak is hardcore because, wait a minute, he held a title 15 times for a combined duration of under 1 day. How the hell is that even possible? That's like falling out of a boat and missing the water, 15 times in a row no less. Retired from the ring for over a decade, Stasiak has worked as a chiropractor and later a motivational speaker. Bradshaw. Bradshaw is hardcore because he continued to live a full, happy, and active life despite getting once knocked out by an ECW announcer that's almost a foot shorter than him. John Layfield is today a financial commentator for Fox Business and Senior Vice President of Northeast Securities. Steven Richards. Richards is hardcore for not only still wrestling more than 20 years after undergoing spinal fusion surgery, but for somehow getting into even better physical shape with each passing year. Richards is the founder of Stevie Richards Fitness, which offers customized exercise regimens tailored to recover from sports-related injuries, which Richards himself knows all too well. Crash Holly. Crash is hardcore because he is the godfather of the 24/7 rule, the man who set the template for evading would-be treasure hunters and random attackers in everyday life. Plus, he's down with Shaft, and we can dig that. Tragically, Michael Lockwood died in November 2003 from what was ruled an intentional drug overdose, aged 32. And finally, Raven. Raven is hardcore because he was the only man in a WCW locker room of about 7,000 wrestlers to stand up and walk out when Eric Bischoff told everybody in August 1999 that they could have their release if they wanted it. That, and also for the clothes he wore when he was Johnny Polo. Still occasionally active as a wrestler, Raven hosts the Raven Effect podcast on Westwood One. Thanks for watching. Let us know what you think in the comments down below. You can follow us on Twitter at Cultaholic. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cultaholic. If you enjoy what we do here at Cultaholic, you can pledge to us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Cultaholic. And most importantly, don't forget to hit subscribe and join us.